Now, those are the main skills which are going to be in objective one of the focus area. But there's two more things that when it comes to evaluating expression, which are useful, especially when you're trying to solve equations and evaluate them, expressions, and also with inequalities that might be useful moving forward on the actual power of focus area. So I want to make sure to address them as well. The next skill that I want to talk about is this idea of combining like terms. You combine like terms by finding terms that have the same power and variable combination. So, for example, in this expression right here, the 5x and the negative 3x are both terms that have the variable x in them. But they're different from terms like the 3y and the y square or the 2 because they don't have that x, right? Now, you might be tempted to put the 3y together with the y square, but they aren't the same because the y square has a power. So they have to have the same variable and power combination. You also cannot put constants together with variables. You can only add constants to other constants. So if you had like a 2 plus a 3, then you can put them together and make a 5. But the moment there's a letter, they have to have, it can only be added to another term that have the same letter and power combination. To combine like terms, that's exactly what you do. You go term by term and try to find terms that look the same kind of letter power combination and add them together. There are some examples here for you to look at. One that I would like to highlight is that when a term cancels out because 5n plus negative 5n is 0n, you don't have to write it on your answer. So let's see how this looks in action with a couple of examples. All right. So we have this right here. And the way I like to do this is actually circling the terms that are in common. So I notice a 3x here, and I also notice another x right here. Now, just because there's no number, that doesn't mean there isn't a coefficient there. It's just a hidden 1, right? It's just 1x. So if I put 1x and 3x together, I make 4x. And then I move on to the next terms that I haven't addressed yet, which is this negative 5y. And I also have this negative 2y. Putting two negatives together makes an even bigger negative number. So negative 5y plus negative 2y should make negative 7y total. Be careful when you're doing this not to accidentally neglect the actual sign of the term you're trying to put together. A lot of people will see the 5y and the 2y and give 3y, but that's not right. You got to actually do the operations correctly. Lastly, we have this 3 that's just by itself. If there's any term that doesn't have another term that's like it, all you have to do is just copy it down. And so there you go. You've combined the like terms. Let's try it again with this expression. Starting with the 4x, what other terms are like it? Well, I do see the negative x right here, and I see another negative 2x right here. So sometimes there's more than one partner that can be put together. Well, if I put negative 4x, and then I put negative x and negative 2x together, I just get x, right? So I'll start with that. 1x is all there's left. And then if I do, the next is negative 6y, and that can be combined with the 2, the plus 2, because they're both constants. And then negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. And then all we have left is that negative 3y that's by itself. And then we just copy it down, negative 3y. And there you go. You've combined like terms. The last skill that I want to talk about, which is not directly tested on the content assessment, but it is very useful when you're trying to do objectives 2 and 3, is evaluating expressions. So let's go over that as well. To evaluate expressions, all you need to do is to plug in on the expression the number that you're trying to actually solve. And I like to do that by rewriting the expression like you see here on the examples with the parentheses in place of the letter. Then you replace the letter with the value that the problem gives you. Like in this example, x is negative 2, so I put the negative 2 instead of the x. And then you operate following order of operations, doing only one step at a time to avoid errors. A note about order of operations. Remember that you don't just work from left to right. You have to follow this sequence. First, you do whatever's inside of a parentheses. Unless there's just a number inside of a parentheses, then there's nothing to do there. But if there's an operation within the parentheses, you do that first. Then exponents. Then you do multiplication or division. Now, this is a big misconception. People think that multiplication always goes before division, and that's not true. If a step has both multiplication and division in it, you do whichever one is on the left. So you break the tie between multiplication and division. So it's not really multiplication and then division. It's multiplication or division. Whichever one is to the left comes first. The same thing applies to addition and subtraction. You're going to do whichever one comes left first. All right. In this example here that I did, there's 3 examples illustrate this, but let's actually practice that with the ones in the actual workshop and see how do we do this. So the first one we have is 4, and I'm going to copy down the expression A. You separate putting the A, I put a parentheses, and I like to do that to avoid making mistakes when it comes to the sign of the numbers that come out of that. And then I replace the parentheses with the numbers that I'm trying to solve. So -2 for A and 3 for B. And now I'm going to evaluate that one step at a time, following the order of operations. Now, the first step I'm going to do is this multiplication over here, because multiplication comes first. Now, there's 2 multiplications, because there's another one between the 3 and then 3 here, but I have to do the one to the left first. So that's -8, and then I'm going to copy down everything else exactly like it's written. To avoid making mistakes, I only take one step at a time. All right, next I have to think about doing that multiplication over here. It's my next step that I have to worry about because the other ones are adding and subtracting, and they go later. So I copy down everything else exactly like it is, and then when I come to the multiplication, I do it. 3 times 3 is 9, and then I copy down the rest, plus 2. All right, so the next step that I need to do, you might be tempted to add here because addition goes first on the PEMDAS, but remember, it's tied with subtraction, so you're actually supposed to go from left to right to break that tie. So it looks like I have to do this subtraction first, this one right here. And so I'm going to switch the signs here, all right, by doing the slash. It looks like I have to put together -8 and -9. Putting together 2 negative numbers, you just make an even more negative number. You just add the numbers together. You should get 17, keep the sign of the biggest, which is obviously negative in this case, and then you actually get -17, and then you still have that +3. I don't know why I copied +2, but see, that's another thing to be careful of. When you are copying down the numbers, you got to make sure you copy the right number, otherwise you make a mistake, right? So working here in the last step, I have to add that +3. It's a good thing I caught that mistake. It is very easy to not notice that you copied something wrong. So I'm glad I did the mistake, though, so that teaches us to be careful when we're copying it down. -17 plus 3 is -14, because when you are adding numbers that have different signs, you're supposed to find the difference between them. And the difference between 17 and 3 is 14. Keep the sign of the biggest, -14. So that's it. That's why it's important to have learned rational numbers really well, because it's going to be important for the rest of the year, as you can see in this evaluating expressions. All right, let's try this again, except this time we have more multiplication and division than we have anything else. Notice I put a parenthesis instead of my B, and then I'm copying down the rest of the expression. I'm going to be careful this time so I don't make mistakes. Instead of the A, you put a parenthesis, and now let's replace the numbers. Instead of B, we put a 3. Instead of the A, we put a -2. All right, and then we go in order and try to operate it. Now, there's division and multiplication here, and you have to go from left to right to break the tie between those. So the first thing I'm going to do right here is this step, 2 times 3, which is 6. And I'm going to very carefully copy everything else so that I don't make mistakes. I only take one step at a time to prevent me from making mistakes. All right. And now I have division and multiplication. You might be tempted to multiply first, but you got to remember that they are actually tied. You got to go from left to right. So I'm going to go this division first. So that's 3 times 4 times -2. All right, and now we have to do the 3 times 4 next. This step right here, because it's to the left. So to break the tie between 2 multiplications, you go from which one is on the left first. So that's 12, and we still have to do that times -2. That's right, because there's a number next to a parentheses. Without a sign, you just multiply. Remember, no sign, multiply. So this last step is just 12 times -2, which is -24. So remember, just take one step at a time and make sure you plug in from the beginning carefully, and then you will do this right. So let's do one last example here Copy down everything carefully, and then put parentheses where your numbers would be. This is so that you don't make mistakes with the signs. So the A is -2, and then you have 3 for the B. All right, so you might be tempted to start off subtracting here, but multiplication has to come first. And so the first step that I have to do is actually this 4 times the 2 here. Remember, no sign, multiply, right? So 4 times 2 is -8, and I have to copy down the rest and just do one step at a time. Now, very careful not to drop the negative sign. This negative is the operation that's before it. The -8 you got in there still needs to be there. So I like to put a parentheses to make sure I remember there's actually 2 negatives there. The negative that comes from 4 times -2 and the negative that's in the subtraction. So you have to include both negatives. Don't drop a negative accidentally. You still have another multiplication to take care of here between the -8 and the 3. So let's copy that down. 3 minus -8 times -3. Oh, so it's not, it's a regular 3. Actually gives you -24 because negative times positive is negative. And now we have 2 negatives to operate next to each other, which are just subtractions. So I'm going to slash here, and it looks like I have to do 3 plus 24, which is 27. And so that's it. Objective number 1, operating expressions, combining like terms, factoring, and expanding. And as you can see, even just one objective takes a lot to cover, which is why this really should be multiple parts. So I hope this was helpful. And on the next video, we're going to focus on equations.